Good morning. As Jennifer said, my name is Nikki Jaworski. I'm the Director of External Affairs for AT&T right here in Cleveland, Ohio. And my role is basically to initiate civic and philanthropic intersection of what AT&T does with our communities. And that's both supporting programs like the Cleveland Water Alliance and the Internet of Water, to working with Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority and offering nano-degree scholarships for CMHA residents. And it's really then addressing to the high school graduation crisis and the dropout crisis that we see in our communities all across the country, and particularly here in Cleveland. So these are things that we as a company have rolled up our sleeves and shown some leadership, and I've been able to engage in that role on behalf of AT&T. So joining us here today for our panel, we have Greg Malkin, who is the director of the Young Entrepreneur Institute and Leadership Center, and Tayyib Smith, who is the co-founder of the Institute of HipHop Entrepreneurship. So a few things we thought we would talk about today. You're here in Cleveland, and we welcome you here. You can see this incredible renaissance that's happening, but there's also a growing unemployment rate for our urban youth. And we want to be able to look at these opportunities for innovation where we can provide leadership and access to training for these underserved populations. And I think both of these gentlemen have some great examples that we can discuss. All right. All right, so kicking things off, just basically with entrepreneurship, there's just, I think, some general misunderstandings about entrepreneurship and barriers to entrepreneurship. How do you each address that with the work that you do? And if you could give us just a little bit of information about each of your organizations and how you break down those barriers to entrepreneurship.
Great, thank you for having me. So my organization, Young Entrepreneur Institute, focuses on grades kindergarten through 12th grade. And not every person is going to be an entrepreneur, but that entrepreneurial mindset, the idea of taking ownership of your life, basic financial literacy, understanding how the capitalistic system works, which is our system here in this country, those are universal life skills and universal understandings. And so, yes, we'd love to have more entrepreneurs in our country. I would anyways. But we believe the mission of our organization is every child should understand and experience entrepreneurship because, again, we think that the skills learned and the knowledge learned is universal. And very much the focus on experience to really change somebody's life. It's really not just sitting in a classroom, it's really having experiences. So we very much focus on experiences. And so to talk about barriers, particularly barriers for young urban populations. And I would say there's really three primary barriers that we've experienced. The first one, the lemonade stand. How many of you have ever visited a lemonade stand? Okay, how many of you wanted the lemonade? Yeah, right. Nobody wants the lemonade. But you understand your role. You understand as an adult that role. Well, the problem for urban populations, and that lemonade stand you probably visit at the end of somebody's driveway or on your street or whatever, the problem in an urban population is there are no safe spaces for these kids to have their lemonade stand. So we've created something called Young Entrepreneur Markets. Those of you who were at the reception yesterday experienced a small young entrepreneur market. What we try to do is identify places where there's going to be lots of adults like this, and reserve space for kids to sell their products. It could be lemonade, somebody was selling chocolate chip cookies, it could be soap, jewelry, whatever. So in wintertime, Winterfest is the festival where the city of Cleveland lights the Christmas tree and there's a craft fair associated with that. We reserve space. So we do all the work, we reserve the space, we have the tables, the chairs, the tents for farmers markets, and then we approach schools and organizations to have their kids come in. So we provide that safe space so the kids can have the experience. So that's one thing we do. Another problem that urban youth have is actually a problem that adults entrepreneurs have, and that's venture capital. How do you have the money to launch your business? You got to have inventory. You got to make your signs. For adults, that might be millions of dollars, but for kids, a lemonade stand, it might take 20, 30 bucks. We're not talking a lot of money. But in an urban population, that $20, $30 is not available to them. So we've partnered with banks and foundations to provide seed capital, and also volunteers to be a loan board. So the students, as part of the process, have to present their business plan for the lemonade stand. They don't know it's been pretty much pre-cooked. You know, everybody gets a loan. The loans are maybe $30, $40 on average, maybe 50. And we've gotten 99+% repayment. So it's a loan. We don't charge interest, though, but it's a loan. And what's nice about that, that loan, that money comes back so that we can loan it out again to the next group. So, so that's something else that we do. And then I think the third real serious problem in the schools is finding time in the curriculum to incorporate entrepreneurship education and experiences. That's a real problem. They're so focused appropriately on math and reading skills and the testing that to open up the space is difficult for entrepreneurship education. And incorporating entrepreneurship education into the curriculum is also difficult. So we've developed a, what I would say is a low impact. It takes maybe 2 or 3 class periods, but is very easy for the schools to implement. It's something called Selling Bee. It's not Spelling Bee, it's Selling Bee, where it just focuses on 2 aspects of entrepreneurship: ideation, coming up with an idea, and then doing a 30-second pitch. And the kids develop a 30-second pitch for their idea, use their iPhone to videotape themselves, upload it to sellingbee.buzz, and it's a regional competition. We expect about 800 kids to participate this fall. So, and that's, by the way, Selling Bee is something we'd love to see other cities do, and if you want to know how to do it, information, come see me at lunchtime.
So, thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the Institute of Hip-Hop Entrepreneurship, but I should probably say that that is not my full-time gig. The Institute came by way of us winning the Night Cities Challenge in 2016 for Calls for Ideas. I was invited to a retreat by Knight Foundation. They asked me to come up with 3 concepts from my own personal experience that could help benefit community. So to backtrack, I got my GED when I was in the military. I'm on my 5th or 6th business. I own a co-working space in Philadelphia where we have about 270 members across 100 businesses, from individual proprietorships to teams of 10. Years ago, I started a print magazine in Philadelphia called 215. I was in the music business. I recently started a real estate development company. And so I have had the benefit of having real life experience of transversing all of the historical and deep policy that kind of create our urban environment, both physical and virtual. So I'm always trying to find ways to empower Black and brown youth to figure out how they can navigate, like, honestly, like really toxic corporate environments or the business environments that are not welcoming to them. So at the Institute, we attempt to encourage people to set their own table versus asking to be at a table. So if you look at the history of, let's just say, Black intellectual capital within the last 100 years, how when we first won this grant, when we made the finals for this grant, we started looking at how hip hop was looked at from academic institutions around the country. So there's programs at Duke, there's a Nasir Jones Fellowship at Harvard, but they kind of look at who played what, when, first, what was, they look at it from a histrionic perspective and don't really give any credence to all of the ways that, even prior to hip hop, that Black intellectual creativity has influenced business practice. So as somebody who was fortunate enough to be in the music business, I was in my formative years in an ecosystem of people who, all virtually became, to some degree, household names. Whether people like John Legend, The Roots, Jazzy Jeff. So I was a part of
that new Philadelphia sound.
Yeah. So I was a part of an ecosystem that enabled me to have a worldwide network of creatives to kind of pull from. And that is one of the things that inspires the Institute.
So the Institute, can you give us a sense of who comes to the Institute,
Okay.
what type of programs they then develop inspired by hip hop?
Okay. So we put out a call for applicants. We had a 2-month window to kind of corral our first cohort. We got 300 applicants. And from that, we selected 50 finalists. And then we whittled that down to 24 people who were in the initial cohort. Mm-hmm. They work over 1 intensive weekend a month with independent study meetups. Their classroom, their base classroom is the co-working space that I'm a partner in. And then we also use innovation spaces around Philadelphia, spaces that they wouldn't have access to, like innovation labs at Drexel University and Temple and Penn. Each month has a really intensive curriculum, kind of preparing you for all of the things you might not be aware of when you owned your own business. And we bring in instructors who have personal real-world experience. Each member of the cohort is assigned a mentor who has experience in the field that they would like to go into. By the 8th month, they have to finalize their idea, and the 9th month, they all compete, and 3 people walk away with $10,000 to go towards their idea.
That's fantastic. Sorry, I'm having this private conversation up here. That's fantastic. What have you learned, for each of you, what have you learned from the young people you have worked with? What solutions have they offered to help inspire broader entrepreneurship to uplift their communities?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, so we work with hundreds of schools and tens of thousands of kids. And just to tell one story, which I think illustrates it. So there's a young woman who grew up in the Fairfax neighborhood in the city of Cleveland. Fairfax is one part of the city of Cleveland, urban, under-resourced community. In high school, she got introduced to entrepreneurship through her school, and we had worked with that school to help them organize and launch their entrepreneurship program. She really caught the bug, started doing lots of young entrepreneur markets. She has a company called Cakeys, which loved baking with her grandmother and baked cookies and cupcakes and so on. And did a lot of that to save money to go to college. She is now a sophomore at Miami University here in the state. And what she's done, though, is she was so inspired by the impact of entrepreneurship education on her this past summer in her neighborhood, in her house, actually. She did a 2-week summer camp for kids in her neighborhood, teaching them about entrepreneurship and giving them an entrepreneurial experience. We helped her develop the curriculum, but I mean, she was just so inspired that she wanted to give back to her community. And I think that more community-based, and certainly it's one thing for me to talk about entrepreneurship to young people in an urban setting, but one of their peers who's just a couple years older, that is so much more impactful because they can imagine themselves as this woman, Kiani Smith. I think it's hard for them to imagine. I don't think they should imagine themselves as me. So I think that's the sort of thing we'd like to see happen.
So one surprising takeaway is I'm really now empowered by the ability that people can grow, and they're not all on the same level. So we have people in our program who might just have their GED, and then we have people who actually have had some level of graduate academic training. And having a collective experiential learning experience. So someone might have more experience with retail, someone else might have more experience with finance, someone else might just be a better presenter, and how the whole group can kind of lift one another up. And something that was interesting for me when we first started talking about this, like it was really sticky within the press. So I've been interviewed by Forbes, CNN, Entrepreneur Magazine, and all these different outlets, and whenever I would meet with journalists, they would talk to me as if I was trying to help the next generation of MCs or producers. But from people under 25, they immediately associate hip-hop with entrepreneurship, so that they would think of someone like a Jay-Z, who has a venture capitalist, venture capital company, but he's a partner in the Barclay Center. But he also has a media platform, and just so many numerous businesses that for them, they're like, oh, this is for me. From an academic perspective, or even, let's say if institutions that I've met with, it's still kind of new and fresh, which was interesting. And then a lot of our cohorts' ideas kind of evolved to things that have to do with making some type of social impact in their community. So one woman I'm really proud of is a young lady named Kyrie Holmes, and she has a company called Onyx Valley. She was one of our 3 winners. She actually works at Comcast during the day, but her venture that she's trying to scale is basically about trying to create a pipeline for innovation, tech, design jobs to be a bridge to corporations. There's another young woman who works at the Philadelphia Film Office, and she is trying to create an agency that would advise companies who have difficulty with hiring and diversity. A lot of ideas, kind of how you spoke to earlier about how in urban environments, there's, whether through urban renewal, through redlining, through all types of generational intrinsic bias, for Black and brown youth, there are no safe spaces. So a lot of our kids want to create their own spaces that are experiential, where people can create, or they can have their own idea labs. And then I guess the last thing is, I already knew this from my own personal experience, but the power of being a part of an ecosystem. And as an entrepreneur, you face so many different hurdles, and you have to have thick skin, and you have to have no problem with no. You almost have to be turned on by no, looking for the next opportunity. And without a cohort of support, or without an ecosystem of support, without mentors who can direct you through their own personal experience, it's really difficult to make any type of change in your life that is transformative in terms of socioeconomic status. So I'm incredibly proud of the young people that are in our program. A lot of them inspire me even more to kind of dig deeper into looking at ways that we can meet people where they are versus kind of talking down to them. Or, I have a big personal problem within the nonprofit academic industrial complex, where we interact with communities in the tradition of colonialism and in the tradition of missionaries. So we're not really looking at an allyship. We're looking at trying to make things cosmetically better. I said to a couple people on my trip yesterday, oftentimes when we talk about like what do we need to do, I feel like it's as if when my mother was sick, I took her to a hospital and she has cancer, and then you give me a plastic surgeon, without being really, really true as to the deep, deep work we need to make change in our communities. I mean, we need a Marshall Plan. We need a New Deal. We don't need trickles of opportunity if they're going to make an institution or a philanthropic organization or a corporation look or feel better. We need to make transformative change. I think the average white person in the United States is 57. The average Asian and Black is 26. The average Latino is 9. If you look at this room and you think of who is making decisions for the future of IoT, it's really scary if you kind of contextualize that in the history of how our built environments were designed. We need more Black and brown architects. We need more Black and brown urban planners. There's a lot of work to do.
I want to continue on this thought, but I also want to make sure the audience has an opportunity to ask questions. We only have a couple minutes, but if anyone wants to go up to either mic, please do so at this time. This is your one and only chance.
Can I follow up on something?
Sure, absolutely.
That you said? So the idea of ecosystem, I think one of the things that makes, in the youth entrepreneurship space, and makes Cleveland really unique, is we have a really strong ecosystem where typically nonprofits work in silos and don't cooperate. It's really different here in the youth entrepreneurship space. So we really do have cooperation, collaboration across organizations, schools, private schools, and so on. And I do have to do a shout out. One of the reasons for that is an organization we are very lucky in the Northeast Ohio to have the Burton D. Morgan Foundation here, which not only does funding, but is a great network collaborator and brings us together that way. And I don't know if Deb Hoover is in the room, but she is a visionary that is changing and changing the face of Northeast Ohio. And so I think we are a model that way, and there are lots of things that we're doing here that we'd love to share in terms of collaboration to solve some of those problems that you're talking about.
We do have one question. If you could identify yourself and ask, please.
Sure. My name is Khalils, Cleveland Heights City Council and policy analyst for Cuyahoga County. My question has to do with that sort of deeper transformation that you referenced. Instead of sort of surface solutions, our kids spend this huge chunk of their time growing up in schools. To quote Deb Prez or paraphrase Deb Prez, the schools don't necessarily teach what they need to survive or what they feel they need to survive and thrive in this society. And whether that's the foundational sort of growing your food, understanding what goes in your body, or sort of the more abstract learning corporate finance or public finance or personal finance. But we have a system in the country, in this state, that rewards certain metrics for schools, and those rewards are even further magnified in probably our most vulnerable populations in our urban centers. People are teaching to the test much more in poorer communities than they are in richer communities. And so things, even though we have sort of a move toward financial literacy being a requirement, we've still got implementation that is spotty, I would say, and also localized, and so not standardized and not necessarily having the impact that we want. So can we do this? Can we actually make this happen without that sort of systemic change where we're talking about teaching entrepreneurship as sort of a fundamental purpose, and not just, you know, starting a business, but entrepreneurship even if you're an employee at some point, but as a fundamental purpose of education, and teaching things like conscientiousness and delayed gratification and all of those things that are left out when we're teaching to a test. How do we do that without scrapping the teaching to the test model that we've created?
So
Well, I have to get the second question from you, and then we may have to just leave it hanging.
well, I just want to say I really appreciate a city council person who can quote Dead Prez, because I've never seen that. But go on.
Joshua Sperling. I'm at the National Renewable Energy Lab, New Concepts Incubator. I like the point on moving from cosmetically improving to deeper engagement. And an idea I've been thinking about, and I'd love to get your feedback here, is if we designed a competition or a challenge for cities and flipped the power structures on its head, where you had 70–80% African-American led design of our city or our neighborhood, 80% led by female, 80% led by social scientists versus more the engineers and architects. What are your thoughts of, could we create a new narrative, or could that be helpful as a process to, I don't think we really know how to do this yet.
So we're out of time, and I'm going to try to address both your questions from my personal experience. I said before, it's about setting your own tables versus asking to be at tables. So if you look at the history of hip-hop and all of the moguls or entrepreneurs who are now household names, they hire from within their community, all right? And for me personally, you know, total disrespect to all the schools that I ever attended, none of them got me here. Right? So I believe in lifelong learning. I believe in mentorship. I believe in changing systems. And I think that we really need to move towards public policy from a municipal, federal, and state level to get people to be forced to make their companies, or anyone who receives tax dollars, to make their companies look like the demography of the region that they're in. And if we don't do things like that, we're just going to be making cosmetic efforts to deep carcinogenic issues in our country.
People are going to expect you to be at the theme table to follow that up over lunch. Sorry, we don't have time for more dive into that question. Thank you so much to our panel. We're going to continue this during lunch and beyond, because you'll be hearing more about the human side of this.